Okay, dear students, good morning, and I welcome you all, today's session. So as you can see on the screen, today's topic is reader response theory. Honestly speaking, reader response theory is one of my favorites since I'm a reader. So certainly I need to respond to the text that I'm reading. And in reader response theory, you can see the reader's importance is emphasized in this theory. So today we will try to look into different aspects of reader response theory and also the key figures who contributed in the making of this theory. So let's just start and let's move on to the next slide. As you can see on the very first screen, it says that reader response criticism, that is one of the major critical schools in contemporary cultural and literary studies. And it has provided an extensively significant approach to reading the text. So significant approach that you can see that we are the readers, and certainly if you have the responsibility, or if you are responsible to analyze or to interpret a text, and if you feel that power, then of course you can find yourself significant and important, and therefore we can relate to the meaning of the text. So obviously reader response theory, actually its significant approach is a significant approach, frequently referred to as a criticism of the consciousness. It found its origin in the phenomenological method of the well-known 20th century philosopher Edmund Husserl. Correspondingly, it was also amended by the practice of hermeneutics in Hans-Georg Gadamer's framework of thought. So if you can recall that in the last lecture, I discussed about a little bit about the phenomenology. So today, I will be sharing one video with you. And this video, actually, it will help us to understand a little bit about the phenomenology. So I'm playing it. If you have any difficulty listening to it or watching it, please let me know. So let's hear it.
Welcome to an explainer on phenomenology. At its most basic, phenomenology is the study of lived experience. As its name suggests, phenomenology is concerned with the study of phenomena that arise from the experience of being in the world. The development of modern phenomenology, established by Edmund Husserl in the early 20th century, was a break from the Cartesian system that pitched stark distinctions between the outer, real reality and the individual experience of reality. Following the Cartesian principle, outer reality is a separate and distinct entity that can only be understood in rational terms through cognitive processes of deduction. Sense perception was thought to distort this process, and certainly emotions were considered a lower form of experience emanating from the recesses of the body. In contrast, phenomenology seeks to understand the outside world as it is interpreted by and through human consciousness. Ontologically speaking, that means speaking in terms of how philosophers understand the nature of being and existence, Husserl purported that reality could be grasped by and through structures of consciousness, by applying what he called intentionality to the object of study, or intentionally directing one's focus to describe realities. For Husserl, to achieve deeper understanding of an object of study, a researcher could quarantine their personal judgments, a process called bracketing, so that preconceived notions do not interfere with the phenomenological inquiry. It is at this point that Martin Heidegger's approach breaks with Husserl's process. In fact, Heidegger was very critical of Husserl's phenomenology, where Husserl sought to capture objects of study as graspable entities that could be objectively studied. Heidegger employed the notion of Dasein, the situated meaning of a human in the world. For Heidegger, consciousness is a product or construction of the historical context from which it arises, and in turn, one can never approach an object of study in a presuppositionless form. That is, objects of study cannot be neatly separated from their contexts, nor should they be. Reality and consciousness are co-creations, and because of this, human understanding always arises from the relationship between the two acting upon each other. Thank you for watching.
Okay, so we came to know about a little bit of phenomenology, and we have seen that Edmund Husserl actually he contributed in the development of phenomenology, and phenomenology actually it contributed to the development of reader response theory. As I said, that actually we say that it's a kind of conscious process. That means in phenomenology, basically we dependent on our sense perception, the way actually we can feel something. And it is a very conscious process. That means very consciously you want to know something, and it's through your perception, it's through your experience. I mean, using your senses that you can experience something, and then therefore you can have an understanding of it. And reader-oriented approaches, it also actually took help from the phenomenology for its development as a theory. And as you can see, we can see the prominence of the reader response theory in 1960s and 70s. And major theoretical evaluations by the American transactional reader response critic like Louis M. Rosenblatt developed this approach to a great extent. Furthermore, the works of the critiques of the Constance School, including Hans Robert Joyce and Wolfgang Iser, played a considerably effective role in the development of this mode of criticism. So these are the people, or we can say that the critique or the philosophers actually, they contributed for the development of reader response theory. The reader response approach to reading the text was thus equipped with a new toolbox, which consisted of highly specialized terminology, such as horizons of expectation, negation, assimilation, creation, the implied or actual reader dichotomy, concretization, and gaps. So reader response criticism has been continually explored in the past decades in terms of the new theoretical frameworks of recent figures. Now, the philosophical background, let's take a look at the phenomenology and hermeneutics. So as we mentioned that Edmund Husserl, actually he is the proponent of the phenomenology. So in the idea of phenomenology, Husserl delineates phenomenology as the science of cognition, or the science of the essence of consciousness. Cognition, as you can understand, that is something related with our brain, with our understanding, that you can take something into your cognizance. And it's a very conscious process. That's why it is also called the science of the essence of consciousness. So according to Husserl, phenomenology is the study of consciousness as experience from the first person point of view. Now, who is the first person and what is the first person point of view? For example, when I say I understand it, I can see it, I can feel it, I can taste it. So you say I'm the first person. So from the first person point of view, that means that individual's participation in the experience is very important, and that experience is very much conscious kind of a sort of experience. That means consciously you are experiencing something. সচেতন ভাবে কোনো কিছুকে যখন আমরা অভিজ্ঞতা নেবার চেষ্টা করি আমাদের ইন্দ্রিয়গুলোকে ব্যবহার করে। So I mean, just what should I say? সহজভাবে, easily, if you really want to understand it, then in Bangla we can say that. Now he argues that objects could be regarded as things which are intended by consciousness. He argues that objects could be regarded as things. So if you want to experience something, and if you intend to experience that, then that is very conscious process. For example, I want to experience, you want to eat some kind of fast food. So you see, you have the intention to eat it. You have the intention to taste it. And consciously, when you're eating it, then you're experiencing it. Then you can say that whether it's sour, whether it is spicy. So you see, you're getting the experience from there. So your intention is very important here, that what you want to know about something, what you want to learn about something. Now, all consciousness is consciousness of something. In thinking, I'm aware that my thought is pointing towards some object. So I'm thinking about something and my thought will direct me to that particular object in that way. So it's a very kind of intentional sort of thing. That means you have the intention to think about something in a different way, and therefore you think about it, that particular object or thing, in a different way. Now, the act of thinking and the object of thought are internally related. So the act of thinking and the object of thought are internally related. That means in your cognition, actually, you know the thing and you have the idea about the object, and then therefore actually keep thinking about it, or you try to understand it. Now, Husserl's main phenomenological method is called bracketing. As you know, the bracket that we use in the mathematics, that is bracket. So if you just can imagine that, then you can understand that when we bracket something, that means we put something within, and then you can focus on it very, what should I say, very consistently. So you put something in bracket. For example, there is a bracket, and in the bracket, your name is there, like Sadia, or like Jannat, or like, Gauss or Shagur. So you are in the bracket, and then you will be within my focus. Then I can focus it, that what is in the bracket. Just for your plain understanding, I'm saying it in that way. So we should put in brackets anything which is beyond our immediate experience. We should reduce the external world to the contents of our consciousness. This is what phenomenological reduction points to. Therefore, everything not immanent to consciousness must be excluded. All realities must be treated as pure phenomena in terms of their appearances in our mind. So being and meaning are always bound up with one another. There is no object without a subject, and no subject without an object. So this is very interesting. That's actually in the previous slide I told you that your thought and the thing, they are internally connected, related. So if you want to experience something and you don't know about it, then you just put that thing within the bracket. That is called we should reduce. It's like a sort of reductive way to understand something. We should reduce the external world to the contents of a consciousness. That means the external world, that all the phenomena that you can see, you can feel in the world. If you want to experience it, the content, if you want to know about it, then you put it within your consciousness. The content, you put it within your consciousness, you bracket it. And this is what phenomenological reduction points to. Therefore, everything not immanent to consciousness must be excluded. That means something, if it is not that much understandable using your experience, then you put it within the bracket, and then you use your consciousness, and then you try to understand it. Okay, so this is the way actually you can use your experience to gain knowledge about any particular thing. So can anyone tell me, what does it mean, immanent? Because if you don't know the meaning of this word, then it will remain incomplete, the understanding, of course. Who can tell me what is immanent? Shagur? Anyone? Sumaida, do you know what is immanent? What does it mean? Immanent means something which is not extrinsic. Which is extrinsic. That means that is inherent. That is existing within you or within something. Okay, so that is called immanent. Do you get the point? Jannah? Hello, Jannah, do you understand me, what I'm saying? Sumaida?
Sir, Arthur,
So what does it mean? The meaning of the word immanent. Can you see the word here? You can see this line. This is what phenomenological reduction points to. Therefore, everything not immanent to consciousness must be excluded. Do you see the word immanent? I-M-M-A-N-E-N-T.
yes, sir.
So immanent means extrinsic. Intrinsic. In Bangla, we call it antarnihito. That means if you don't have any idea about that particular stuff, then it should be excluded from your consciousness because you will not be able to understand it. Okay. So in this way, actually, we reduce the thing or the materials, and all realities must be treated as pure phenomena in terms of their appearances in our mind. So phenomena means drishabuli. Phenomena means the surroundings, or you can see the ambience, whatever actually you can see in the world. I mean, that you can experience with the use of your indriyo or your senses. That you call phenomena. যেটা বোঝা যায়, যা কিছু আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি, সবকিছু phenomena. Plural আমরা ব্যবহার করছি. That's a plural form of phenomenon, that is phenomena. And it says that in terms of their appearance in your mind. For example, if I say it's a cell phone, so you can feel the appearance, you know the appearance, and you can understand it, that how does it look? You can imagine about it. So in this way, it says that all realities must be treated as pure phenomena in terms of their appearances in our mind. So the way actually they appear in our mind, it should be treated as a reality in that way. So that's why it says that being and meaning. Being means ostitve thaka, kono kichu ache, in existence, something is there, that is being, and meaning is meaning means it will be significant in your life, it will have some significance, it will have some sort of importance. Also, we can say that meaning means it will have some semantic value in your life. Ortho, একটা হচ্ছে অস্তিত্ব, একটা হচ্ছে অর্থ. So being and meaning, or you can say thought and objects, so they're always bound up with one another. That means they're connected, they're interrelated, interwoven, their existence, that you can say. So there is no object without a subject. So if you want to want to imagine an object, then there must be a subject, and no subject without an object. So, and if there is no object, there is no subject. If there is no subject, there is no object. So for subject and object, or you can say the thought and the thing, so you can see they are interrelated and they should exist together. They cannot live exclusively, but they live inclusively. Phenomenological criticism is an attempt to apply the phenomenological method to the reading of literary works. So we use it to understand the literary works. As with Husserl's bracketing of the real object, the actual historical context of the literary work, its author, conditions of production, and readership are ignored. Phenomenological criticism aims instead at a wholly immanent reading of the text, totally unaffected by anything outside it. So it depends on the text, immanent, that is intrinsic, whatever the meaning, the intrinsic meaning of the text that is important. Husserl's phenomenology thus focuses on the central role of the perceiver in creating meaning. Perceiver in creating meaning. When you read a text, that means you perceive it. Do you get the point, dear students? You understand what is perceived, right? Shahrear? Okay, maybe he's absent. Okay, Jannat, you understand what is perceived? Jannat, tell me. To perceive. To perceive, what does it mean? Or how do we perceive? What do we use to perceive something? In Bengali, what does it mean, perceive? Who can say? So the person who perceives, we call him perceiver. So according to phenomenology, you can see the focus is on the perceiver. That means the reader. Or when it comes to the text, that is the reader. But if it is not the text or anything else, for example, you are enjoying the view of the, you're just on the riverside and you're enjoying the view of the river. So then in that case, you can say you are a perceiver because you are creating some kind of perception about the particular river that you are watching right at that moment. So in that way, you are a perceiver. And when it comes to the text, we are also perceivers, and we create meaning. Because when we perceive something, we create our own meaning. So Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, he argued that being meant being in the world. Being meant, that means if you say that being, That means you exist somewhere. That means you're existing in the world. And we are human subjects only because we are bound up with others and the material world. And these relations are constitutive of our life. So you see, his idea of phenomenology is more inclusive. We are human subjects. Human subjects means all of us, we are subjects. And we are bound up with others. Others means the other subjects, other human beings, other creations, and the material world. That means the matter that you can see around the world. So the people or the human beings and the materials are interconnected. They're interrelated. And these relations are constitutive of our life. And you see, these relationships, that means relationships that exist among the subjects and the material world, they are constitutive of our life. That means whatever actually we have, the perception that we have about our life, that is, you can say, is constituted because of the relationship with the subject and the material world. That means I have, since my birth, actually, I witnessed lots of things. I experienced this material world from different perspectives, and I perceived different kinds of stuff. And therefore, actually, I constituted, structured, or formulated some sort of knowledge or experience in my mind. So that's it, saying that these relations are constitutive of our life. So whatever actually we call life, that is the constitutions of all these experiences and knowledge, and the interactions between or among the subjects and the material world. The world is not an object out there to be rationally analyzed. So it says that the world is not an object out there to be rationally analyzed. He's saying that you cannot use your rational all the time perfectly or accurately to analyze the world, the outside world, the external world. He's saying that it is not always possible. So it is never something we can get outside of it. It is never something we can get outside of it. We emerge as subjects. That means we, the human being, we are the subject. Emerge as subjects from inside a reality which we can never fully objectify, which encompasses both the subject and object. So we can never fully objectify the whole subjects and object things, but all the subject and object, all these things, the material world and the human beings or the subjects, they encompass the whole thing, the reality. I mean, they're interrelated, and their relationship or existence is interwoven in such a way that you cannot separate them. So inside a reality, we can never fully objectify, and you cannot put them in the shape of the object all the time, but you can create some sort of perception in your mind. And that's a which encompasses both the subject and object. Now, Heidegger described his philosophical enterprise as a hermeneutic of being. And we know in the last lecture, actually, I talked about a little bit of hermeneutics, as you can remember. So we know that the word hermeneutics actually, it means the science of, or the art of interpretation, interpreting any sort of text. And especially it is started with the interpretation or the analyzing the scriptures, especially the biblical scriptures. So from there, actually, we have got this philosophical trend that we call today hermeneutics. So, and Heidegger actually calls this hermeneutic of being, the way actually we interpret the whole thing, the way actually we interpret our existence, our meaning in this world. That is, according to Martin Heidegger, he's calling this hermeneutic of being. All right. Now, hermeneutics was originally referred to the interpretation of sacred scriptures that I have already mentioned, like biblical scriptures. But during the 19th century, it broadened its scope to encompass the problem of textual interpretation as a whole. So later on, actually, the critique, the critics, they took this very technique that we call hermeneutics. They used it to analyze any sort of text. So it has become now common to analyze any text that we call hermeneutics in the present day. Now, Hans-Georg or Georg or George, the way you say it, the Gadamer. So it was Gadamer who applied Heidegger's situational approach to literary theory in order to arrive at a new definition of reading. For Gadamer, the meaning of a literary work is never exhausted by the intentions of its author. As the work passes from one cultural or historical context to another, new meanings may be emerged, and they were never anticipated by its author or contemporary audience. Now, this is pretty interesting that Gadamer actually, he took this idea of, you can say, the Heidegger's, the situational approach to literary theory, and then you see he's using it in a different way. He says that the meaning of a literary work, that means if you take the literary work of Shakespeare, or if you take the literary works of uh, W.B. Yeats or T.S. Eliot, or maybe Rabindranath Tagore or Kazi Nazrul Islam or Al Mahmoud. So if you take the work, you can see because of your background and because of your educational background, because of your country, because of your cultural context or historical context, you see the way you will interpret the work of Kazi Nazrul or Al Mahmoud or Shakespeare and the way I will analyze it, they'll be different. For example, a person reading Shakespeare here in Bangladesh and a person reading Shakespeare in England, their understanding will be different because of a socio-cultural and also economics and historical context. Uh, you can say from a broader perspective, actually they are different. And because of this difference, meanings are also different, and meaning will emerge in a different way to different people in different contexts. And so you can see the way the author actually, he anticipated that we would interpret the text. Actually, it will not be like that. Rather, you can see maybe immerse, and they were never anticipated by its author or contemporary audience. That means the way the audience or even the author, they anticipated that these should be interpreted in this way. You cannot say that because of the cultural and historical context, meaning will always vary. It will be different. Now, all interpretation is situational, shaped and constrained by the historically relative criteria of a particular culture. So you say all interpretation is situational. That means based on your situation, based on your context, you will interpret a text in a different way. So that's why it says that it is situational. It depends on the situation. In which situation you're reading a particular text. For example, if you read a love poem, when you're in a good mood, you'll see that the interpretation of the love poem will be different. And if you're not in a good mood, if you're unhappy or sad, or if you feel deprived, and at that moment, if you read a love poem, then you can see the love poem when you're in a good mood, it will be different. And the love poem, the same love poem, when you read in a bad mood, you can see the meaning will be different because it depends on the situation, the situation where you are in right at that moment. So all interpretation is situational, shaped and constrained by the historically related criteria of a particular culture. So based on the culture and based on the criteria, standard of the particular culture, and when you relate it to the history, that is historically related, that means it is related with the time. So in different times, you will find the interpretation of a particular text in a different way. So for Gadamer, all interpretation of a past work consists in a dialogue between past and present. So which is very interesting. You can see that all interpretation of a past work consists in a dialogue between past and present. Now here I can also mention the tradition and the individual talent by the T.S. Eliot, Thomas Easton Eliot, where he's also actually saying in his text about the pastness of the past and also the you can see the present of the past. That means past is present here, even in our day, and also that past will be present here, and that same past, in collaboration with the present, that will also lead to will take us to the future. So you can see that we are, you can say, influenced by the past, and that past actually take us to the present and also to the future. So here you can see it's the same sort of vibe, that is a dialogue between the past and present. That means past and present, they have some sort of interaction. So you cannot, according to T.S. Eliot, you cannot avoid the tradition, you cannot ignore the tradition, and ignoring tradition, you cannot say that you will be a genius, you will be an individual. So as an individual poet or writer, actually, you cannot be great until and unless you can adopt, and also you can adopt the tradition, and you can make some adaptation, or you can make some changes to that past or that tradition, and then you can make it useful for your own purpose. So past is there, past is there in the present. He's also calling T.S. Eliot, he's calling it that the historical sense. And we can find the same vibe here in the Gadamer. All interpretation of a past work consists in a dialogue between past and present. The present is only understandable through the past. T.S. Eliot is also saying the same thing, that you can understand the present. Uh, I mean, if you have a good sense of the past, that means past writers and their tradition, if you know them, then you can use those past things, and then you can have your own present in a different way. So we twist a little bit the past, and we take help from the past, and then we create something new. And you cannot be completely novel until and unless actually you have the sense of the past. So it's the same thing, actually. You can find it here. The present is only understandable through the past, with which it forms a living continuity, and the past is always grasped from our own personal viewpoint within the present. So you can see, and the past is always, he's also saying that, I mean, this tradition, actually, this thing, or this interaction between past and present, there's some sort of living organism, you can say. They're living things. So it's a kind of continuity. The past is going on, past is here in the present, and the present will be past, and then it will be, it will be moved forward, or it will be pushed to the future. And the past is always grasped from our own personal viewpoint within the present. So in the present, we will have some viewpoint, and this viewpoint will be about the past. So staying in the contemporaneity, or being in the contemporaneity, or contemporaneous, contemporary society, or contemporary writing style or reading style, you'll be there, and then you will use that your present knowledge, or your present existence, or your present perception to understand the past. The event of understanding comes about when our own horizon of historical meanings and assumptions freezes within the horizon within which the work itself is placed. So you see the horizon of historical meanings. So it's a kind of amalgamation, or you can say it's a kind of fusion. So you put them together, and then you can have an understanding. The history of Gadamer is a continuing chain. So history for Gadamer, that means he says, what is history? Itihash ki. It's a continuing chain. It একটা chain moto. 1971, then the history of 1972, then the history of 1973, then 1975, 1974, 1975. So it will go on and on in this way, and it continues. So it's a kind of chain, the past. It's a kind of chain. So they're interconnected. He perceives history as a living dialogue between past, present, and future. The same, you can find the echo in the T.S. Eliot's the tradition and the individual talent, the way Gadamer actually he's talking about the history. That history actually for him it's a kind of living dialogue. It is something which is some sort of living organism. And you can see this is the interaction between, or the conversation between or among the past, present, and future. The most recent development of hermeneutics is known as reception aesthetics or reception theory. And what is this reception theory? Reception theory focuses on the reader's role in literature. So you see, from phenomenology, actually, we are moving to our understanding of reader response theory. So what is it? Actually, here you can see that how the reader, actually, they will be liberated. Readers will be liberated from any kind of obstacles, and they can interpret the text in their own way. So see, reception theory focuses on the reader's role in literature and the process of reading, which is always a dynamic point. So you see, reception theory, that means the way you receive a text. Reception, গ্রহণ করি কিভাবে, আমি কিভাবে নিচ্ছি একজন reader হিসেবে. And the process of reading, which is always a dynamic one, and it's always a dynamic means it is not a static. It's not a static one. It is there is some sort of continuation, a never-ending process. There are a wide range of theorists who are considered as reader-oriented critics. And who are they? We'll come to know about those proponents or key figures of reader response theory in a while. Now, the reader response theory is deeply rooted in the cognitive constructive view of learning. Cognitive constructivist view of learning. So you can see cognitive that I've already mentioned, it is related with your cognition. মানুষের মন এবং মগজ মাথায় যেটা থাকে, cognition, your sense, চেতনা. So that is cognitive and constructivist. That means you gain knowledge, you grow an understanding of it, then you construct based on your existing knowledge. You construct the knowledge, in relation with, based on your ideas, your perception about the world. So that's a together actually they call cognitive constructivist view of learning. The theory first emerged in the 1930s and gained popularity in the 1960s and 1970s. The theory was first developed by Louis Rosenblatt and stresses on the cruciality of the reader in making meaning from a text. So reader will create the meaning. That means you will take the thing in your cognition, in your understanding, and therefore, based on that understanding, you will construct a meaning. That's why we're calling it cognitive constructivist. Do you follow me, dear students? I hope you understand it. So, Mara, is that okay? Jannat?
Yes, sir.
So you understand what is cognitive constructivist. That means you will use your mind, your psyche, and your brain, and then you'll construct a meaning on the basis of that cognition, of that understanding. So that's why we're calling it cognitive constructivist. Okay. Now, based on the premise of readers breathing in life into the text using the prior knowledge and personal experiences. So this based on the premise of readers breathing in life into the text. That means we are the readers, we are reading a text, and we are breathing in life into the text. That means we are making it alive. আমরা এটাকে জীবন্ত করে তুলি নতুন নতুন অর্থ ক্রিয়েট করার মাধ্যমে একটা টেক্সটকে। সুতরাং রিডারই হচ্ছে একটা টেক্সটকে জীবন দেয়। So in a sense, you can see that you will create the meaning, the readers. So you have given that power. So you see how actually the readers they have been empowered because they can create the meaning. And how will you do that? You will use your prior knowledge, that knowledge that you have in your mind, and your personal experiences. So here comes, you can see you can find the importance of phenomenology. That it's using your experience and then you develop an understanding about the phenomena, about the outside world, the external world. The reader response theory supports the process of making readers critical, thoughtful, and engaged. So you see, reader response theory actually, it's supposed the process of making readers. So actually it will help the reader to be critical, to be thoughtful, and to be engaged. Okay. So there you can see that how actually readers, they have been given the power to create or construct meaning of a text. Now, first emerging in the 1930s, the reader response theory gained popularity almost 30 to 40 years later and is deeply connected to the cognitive constructivist form of learning. The theory acknowledges the varied interpretations that readers might have on literary works, in this top-down model. Students are therefore valued and encouraged to interpret literary works and arrive at their own independent conclusions. So you see, as readers and as students, actually, we are encouraged to have our own meaning. So I have already mentioned that how actually as a reader, you will feel more independent and you'll feel liberated, or you'll feel freed from any kind of obstacle. So you can have your own meaning after reading a literary text. Now, it was I. Richards who discussed one's emotional response towards literature. This was closely followed by the conceptualization of the reader response theory, was in the 1920s. This concept was later further advanced by D.W. Harding and Louis Rosenblatt in the 1938. And by the 1978, with more rigorous emphasis given to the readers and their experience of the text in works by Norman Holland, Stanley Fish, Wolfgang Iser, and Hans Robert Jaws. So in her book, Literature as Exploration, so this is the name of the book. So Rosenblatt asserted her view of the reader playing a vital role in any piece of literature. So she's saying in a book that is titled Literature as Exploration. So there she says that the reader plays the vital role to have or to create a meaning in the literature, to create meaning in any piece of literature. Her transactional theory of reading emphasized the readership between reader and the text while constructing meaning. So you see, it's a kind of transactional theory. Transactional theory means the reader will take the text, they will read the text, they will understand the text, and at the same time, they will construct a different kinds of meaning. So it's a kind of transaction. একটা আদান প্রদান হয় এখানে reader এর সাথে text. That's why we're calling it transactional theory. Now, I'll not go through the whole thing, but there are a few important uh, ideas are here, so I'd like to focus on those things only. Now, here you can see the Larson's definition of the reader response is that moment when readers breathe life into text through their prior knowledge and personal experiences. So we have already come to know about it, that we'll have a personal experiences, and then we will infuse life into the text using our prior knowledge and personal experiences. So our personal experiences and our prior knowledge both are very important here. And now his epistemological writings transaction imply that during the reader process, he's saying that reading process, what happens when we read a text? The self of the reader and the text are more flexible. So the reader as a self, as a person, and the text as an entity, both of them, they are very flexible so that they can interact. As a reader, if you're rigid, and as a text, if the text is rigid, and if it declines to give any access to create new meaning, then in that case, actually, this transactional theory, it will not work and reader response theory will not be there. So in both parties, they should be flexible, pliable, and easily accessible. So reader will find the text accessible, and the text will allow the access to the reader so that they can create their meaning. Thus, according to the reader response theory, the act of constructing meaning is a personal literary experience and a major characteristic that connects the reader and the text. So you see, it's a kind of personal literary experience. So individualism is very much important here. So how an individual as a reader, actually, they have been empowered, glorified in the reader response theory that you can witness this here very clearly. And that is a major characteristic that connects the reader and the text. Now, Panley also acknowledges that in the reader response theory, the reader plays the role of an agent who assigns meaning whilst experiencing the text. So this is very interesting that you can see it here, that the reader plays the role of an agent. Agent means korta, but jini kajটি করে থাকেন, who assigns meaning whilst experiencing the text. তিনি কি করেন, যখন টেক্সটটা তিনি পড়েন, তিনি তার উপরে এটা এক্সপেরিয়েন্স, তিনি তার নিজের অভিজ্ঞতা নেবার সময় ওই টেক্সটে তিনি তার একটা অর্থ তিনি প্রদান করেন বা একটা অর্থ তিনি ক্রিয়েট করেন, assigns meaning whilst experiencing the text. So reader will impose meaning, or they will create meaning of the text after reading the text. The theory focuses on the approaches and techniques that are involved in studying how readers respond to a piece of literature, and at the same time addresses the strategies used by those readers. So you see, this approach actually, it will focus on the approaches and techniques that are involved in studying how readers respond to a piece of literature. That when you read a piece of literature, that how do you respond, or what are the techniques or approaches that you have used to understand the text, to create the meaning of the text. So that will be explored in reader response theory. So this leads to the implication that teachers can create better readers by permitting the possibility of more than one's chance to recreate the meaning of their story in their own particular style. And this statement is further supported by Woodruff and Griffin, who mentioned that the theory supports the process for students to be engaged, thoughtful, and critical readers. So you can see in the classroom, the teachers actually, they have the responsibility, and they can allow their students to read the story, a particular piece of literature, several times, and they can facilitate the students to create and recreate the meaning again and again. And in this way, actually, students will be more creative, they'll be more critical, they'll be more thoughtful. So we can have, I mean, well-educated readers who can criticize and who can create meaning in a very significant way. Now, Harvilla actually proposed a shift in the style of questioning the teacher could use, for example, instead of asking, for example, in the class, if you're a teacher, maybe some of you actually in future will be the teacher. So you can do this with your students. Then what does the author mean? And so instead of asking, so don't go for this, and what does the author mean? Or that rather actually, as a teacher, you should ask that, how did you feel when reading? So instead of asking about the author's intention, that we call intentional fallacy, when you discuss a Euclidism and formalism, Russian formalism also, there actually and even in structuralism. So we talked about this intentional fallacy, and there actually we found that how actually we shouldn't care about the intention of the author. So what does the author mean? It doesn't have any value. And if you really want to emphasize on the reader's response, so instead of asking what does the author mean, we can ask how did you feel when reading. So in that case, actually we will actually, in a sense, empower the students, will empower the readers. And when they're empowered, then of course they will feel free to create meaning in their own way. So we should do it actually when we want to encourage very, significant way of reading. Up. If you want to encourage creativity and if you want to encourage different kinds of interpretations of a text. Now, you see, focus on reader response strategies. So there are some strategies that actually I'd like to focus on. As you can see, reader response strategies can be categorized according to Richard Beach in a teacher's introduction to reader response theories. There you can see, he said that into 5 different types, actually, we can classify the reader response strategies. One is textual, another one is experiential, then psychological, social, and lastly, we have cultural. So textual, experiential, psychological, social, cultural. So these are the strategies that we can use to analyze a text to create meaning. Okay, the textual reader response strategies. So let's take a look at it. Now, performing a close reading of a text teaches you to look closely at the way a text operates and to glean some meaning from the workings of the text. So textual reader response strategies. That means you will take a look to the text that we call in a sense that is close reading. So you take a look at the text and then you try to understand the way the text operates, and then you try to glean some meaning from the workings of the text. Glean means you try to collect some meaning. You try to collect some ideas, opinions. You can have construct your own opinions of the text after reading the text. In other words, your interpretation is primarily directed by the text. That means you're not taking help of anything. You just read the text and then you interpret it in your own way. That's it, plain and simple. Textual reader response approaches admit to the fact that the text does influence the way readers read and construct meaning. So the text does influence. That means the text actually it influences the readers, and then it influences the reader how to read the text and how to construct the meaning. Thus, the reader and the text interact in the process of formulating a meaning of the text. That we call transactional theory. That means that the text and the meaning, they will be formulated after reading the text. So you see, it's a kind of interaction between the reader and the text. So it's a kind of understanding between the reader and the text. And therefore, actually, they will create a meaning. The reader will create a meaning. So imagine a text as a painting in an art gallery. And your interpretation of the painting will be based on whether you like it or not. But this reaction will be directed by the painting itself. For example, if you go to, for example, in Bangladesh, we have the famous place called Shilpakala Academy. And if you go there and if you'll find that sometimes there are some sort of exhibitions. All the time exhibitions are going on there, and especially the exhibitions for paintings. If you go there and can find that there are lots of paintings out there, and if you just stand in front of a painting, especially if it is an abstract one, then you can stand in front of the painting and you can have your own interpretation, and you can create your own meaning after taking a look at the painting. So you can see it's a kind of interaction between you and the painting. Similarly, you take a text, so it's a kind of interaction between you and the text. So that's why it is called transactional theory. That means it's a kind of transaction, it's a kind of interaction between the text and the reader. Now here, more about textual reader response strategies. Here it says that you consider a literary text as a musical composition. As a listener, you are moved by the music, but you must relate the music to some experience to make it work emotionally on you. So you're listening to music, and then you should use your previous experience to relate to the music. Then actually you can feel it. or another metaphor, that a text is like an unfinished sculpture. Sculpture means bhaskorjo, that we say in Bengali. So you take the text and then you you stand in front of the yeah, so yeah, as I was saying that suppose you're standing in front of an unfinished sculpture, bhaskorjo, and then you try to understand it, that what should be, I mean, how it should have been finished. এটা কিভাবে শেষ হতে পারতো, স্কাল্পচারটা কোনভাবে এটাকে শেষ পর্যন্ত যিনি স্কাল্পচর বা যিনি ভাস্কর তিনি এটা কিভাবে শেষ করতে পারতেন। So you try to create your own way of I mean, just you're using your imagination, at the same time you're using your experience, your perception about the sculpture, about the painting, and then you imagine that how actually it could have been finished. Thus, to textual reader response critics, the text directs interpretation as the reader directs the text to interpretation. So the text directs interpretation as the reader directs the text to interpretation. So that means the painting itself will direct you, the text that you're reading. For example, any poem, you're reading a poem by, for example, you're reading Shakespeare's sonnets, and that sonnet will direct you to the interpretation because it will interact with you, not the poet, not the author, but the reader and the text. They will talk to each other and they will have their own interpretation. And therefore, I mean, as a result of this interaction, the reader actually will create his own meaning. I see Louis Rosenblatt. She says about the text, he says, text is just link on a page until the reader comes along and gives it life. The text is just like just ink on a page until reader comes along and gives it life, and which is true. For example, if I write if I write a poem, or I wrote poems and I kept those poems only to me and nobody read my poems, so you can see in that sense it's just ink on a page because nobody's reading and nobody's interpreting. But when people come to know about my writings, and if they start reading my writings, then they will have their own interpretation, and therefore you can see the text actually it will get alive. পড়ার মধ্যে দিয়েই এই যে কালো অক্ষরের পেজের উপরে যে লেখাগুলো থাকে সেটা যেন জীবন ফিরে পায় বা জীবন পায়। আদারওয়াইজ ওটা শুধুমাত্র একটা পিস অফ পেপারের উপর কিছু আঁকিঝুঁকি বা কিছু লেখা টেকাই, কিন্তু ওর কোনো জীবন নেই। বাট when you read the text and then you start giving it to the meaning, then the text itself actually it becomes lively, or it becomes live, জীবন্ত হয়ে ওঠে। Now, Rosenblatt believes readers transact with the text by bringing in their past life experiences to help interpret the text. So that means we have our own past experience and we use the past experience to interpret the text, and which is true. All of us, we have our own experiences and we use our experiences to understand the text. So Rosenblatt, she says in this work, Literature as Exploration, in this book, she says that she is actually having this idea about the reader response theory, about reading the text. The reading literature becomes an event. The reader activates the work through reading. So reading actually it is an event. আমরা বাংলা ইভেন্ট বলতে কি বুঝি, যেখানে অনেক কিছু ঘটে, অনেক কাজকর্ম হয়, একসাথে অনেক কিছু চলে, আমরা সেরকম একটা সেই বিষয়গুলোকে ইভেন্ট বলে থাকি। That means lots of things are going on together in an event. The reader activates the work through reading, and we start reading a text and then therefore it becomes an event. And Rosenblatt argues that any literary text allows for an efferent reading, which is what the reader believes should be retained after the reading. Efferent reading. Efferent reading means which is what the reader believes should be retained after the reading. That means I believe something, and after reading a text, I will have that belief about that reading, about my knowledge, about my understanding of the text. So should be retained after the reading. So which is what the reader believes. So I believe that it's about love, or it is hatred, or it is selfishness, or it is sacrifice. So you believe something, and after reading the text, you retain that belief. Okay. And the aesthetic reading is, on the other hand, is what the reader experienced while reading. So one is you retained after the reading the beliefs that you have, and another one is aesthetic reading is that is what the reader experiences while reading. So when you read a text, you are having a different kinds of experience. You are creating a different kinds of meaning. That is aesthetic reading. The aesthetic reading accounts for the changes in a reader's attitude towards a literary work. Rosenblatt's theory provides for a process of reading that leads to discussion and interpretation. A reader transacts with a literary text during the reading process, focusing on the aesthetic response while reading. So you see, aesthetic reading actually where you create the meaning, not the efferent reading. So that's why some sort of transaction, some sort of interpretation actually it goes on during the aesthetic reading, because after reading actually you feel different, or you have a different kind of understanding about a text. So after reading them, the reader reflects on the aesthetic response and compares it to the textual evidence and other interpretations. So you see, in the aesthetic, I mean, when you read a text and then you reflect on the aesthetic response, that means critically you analyze, or creatively you analyze the text, and your response is very creative, very aesthetic, and then you compare your understanding with the other interpretations, with the other understanding of the text. And then you have a different kinds of meaning of the text. So that's why it can, some sort of transactions are going on between the reader and the text. So in a way, literary interpretation is more focused on the transaction, the process of reading, than on an interpretation of a particular work. So it's a process of reading, which is very important. So, and it has been focused here. Okay. Now let me. So here you can see, we can talk about ISER. So you see, according to ISER here, if you look at the second paragraph in this slide, you can see, according to ISER, every literary work is balanced by two poles, the artistic and the aesthetic poles. So in every, I mean, whenever actually you read a text, you can you have to maintain the balance between two poles. মানে দুটো মেরুর মধ্যে তোমার একটা ব্যালেন্স করতে হবে, একটা হচ্ছে আর্টিস্টিক আর একটা হচ্ছে এস্থেটিক। আর্টিস্টিক হচ্ছে যেখানে শৈলীটা নিয়ে তুমি কাজ করছো, এস্থেটিকটা হচ্ছে যেখানে অ্যানালিটিক্যালি, অর ইউ ক্যান সে দ্য বিউটি অফ দ্য টেক্সট দ্যাট ইউ আর মোর কনসার্নড উইথ। So artistic and aesthetic poles roughly corresponding to Rosenblatt's efferent and aesthetic. So the artistic, the way actually the writer actually created the text, the style that the writer followed, that is the artistic one. Do you get me what I'm saying? Janna, do you understand?
জি স্যার, স্যার আর্টিস্টটা মানে হচ্ছে স্যার স্টাইলটাকে যেটাকে ফলো করে।
ওটা রাইটারের ক্ষেত্রে, ওটা তোমার আমার না। ও রাইটার যে আর্ট ফলো করে লিখেছেন, তার যে শৈলী ভালো লেগেছে, যে স্টাইল ভালো লেগেছে। আর এস্থেটিক পোলটা কোনটা? যেটা হচ্ছে রিডার হিসেবে তুমি পড়ার পরে তোমার কাছে যেটা মনে হচ্ছে যে এটা কিভাবে হবে, কিভাবে হচ্ছে, তাহলে ওইটা হচ্ছে রাইটারলি, আর এটা হচ্ছে রিডারলি। বুঝে গেছে? তো আইজার বলছেন এটা, আর রোজেনব্ল্যান্ড বলেছেন একই জিনিস, উনি ভিন্ন নামে বলেছেন। উনি বলছেন আর্টিস্টিকটাকে উনি বলেছেন এফারেন্ট, যেটা তোমার বিলিফটাকে চেঞ্জ করে না, তুমি এটা এই স্টাইলে, এটা কবিতা, এটা গল্প, এই শৈলীটা মেনটেন করে করেছেন, ইট ডাজন্ট চেঞ্জ। কিন্তু এস্থেটিকের ক্ষেত্রে এসে আমার চেঞ্জ হয়ে যাচ্ছে। এই জন্য আর্টিস্টিক অ্যান্ড এস্থেটিক, ওটাকেই আবার Rosenblatt, I mean, we can say either he's calling it artistic and Rosenblatt, she's calling it efferent. Either he calls it aesthetic poles, and Rosenblatt, she calls it aesthetic poles, or aesthetic reading. So almost same, you can say. So for Isa, the aesthetic pole is that created by the author. So artistic or a style that is created by the author, not by the reader. The aesthetic pole is that realized or completed by the reader. So that is by the author, sorry, the artistic pole that is created by the author, by the writer. The aesthetic pole is that realized or completed by the reader. So artistic or a style is created by the author, লেখক সেটা তৈরি করেন। Aesthetic pole or aesthetic reading, that is solely, actually, you can see the reader is responsible for that, that we'll create the meaning, we'll create the interpretation, we'll have the interpretation. That is Wolfgang Iser, that's his image or photograph. Okay. Now, here you can see an interesting development. Since a literary work is caught between these two poles, that is, he called it artistic and aesthetic. Remember, Isa, okay, Wolfgang Isa. He called it artistic and aesthetic. Now, since a literary work is caught between these two poles, that is the artistic and aesthetic poles, its meaning resides in the gap between these poles. Very interesting. That means the writer created a kind of style or art, and therefore he tried to impart on it a different kinds of meaning in his own way. That's his intention. And the reader, actually, they will create their own meaning. That is the aesthetic pole or aesthetic reading that we can say. And in between these two, there is something else. The meaning, actually, it is in between. Writer says something and I understand something, and meaning is in between. So the primary quality of the text is its indeterminacy. So the meaning is always, you can say, it is never fixed. It's very flexible. So it keeps changing. So I'm an individual, you're an individual, Jannat is an individual, or Nahida is an individual. So you have your own way of understanding a text, and I have my own way of understanding a text. So my aesthetic pole or my aesthetic reading will be different, and your aesthetic reading will be different. And therefore, actually, it will create a different kinds of meaning in between. So that's why you're calling it the text is the primary quality of a text is its indeterminacy. এটাকে কখনোই তুমি একটা নির্দিষ্ট কোনো কিছু দিয়ে আটকাতে পারবে না, meaningটা changing. A textual critic also recognizes that the text, the artistic pole, guides the reader who resides in the aesthetic pole. The artistic pole means the writer's way of writing, his style, the way he created the style of the art. So that will guide the reader who resides in the aesthetic pole. Aesthetic pole এর মধ্যে কি আছে মিনিংটা কি হবে, ওইটা কিন্তু রাইটারের স্টাইলটা অনেক কিছুই কিন্তু তাকে প্রভাবিত করবে, ইনফ্লুয়েন্স করবে। So he distinguishes between the implied reader on the text creates for itself, the text creates itself, and the actual reader, the reader who brings things to the text. This is very, very interesting. So he says that he distinguishes between the implied reader. Implied reader means the artistic pole, and because of the writer's style and the art, there will be one reader that is implied reader, because the writer wants you to read the text in this way, or that was his intention. So that is one reader, but actually that reader is not there, because the original agent, or I'm the reader, so I will create my meaning. But there is another one, implicitly another reader is there. That reader is created by the writer, by the author. And the actual reader is me when I'm reading the text, the reader who brings things to the text. So I bring things to the text, means I bring meaning or interpretation to the text. So implied reader and the actual reader. Consequently, there exists a gap between the implied and the actual reader, and between the artistic and the aesthetic poles. So implied reader and actual reader, there is a gap, and artistic and aesthetic poles, there is a gap. So, and here actually we get the meaning of a text. And that's why actually the meaning of the text is always indeterminate, or it is not fixed. The reader then must perform gap filling to concretize the text. So concretize the text. If you want to get a meaning of the text, then you have to concretize. You have to understand the gap, and therefore you have to create a meaning from that gap. Umberto Eco, another reader response critic, takes gap filling even farther. So he takes this gap, and to fill the gap, he is arguing in this way that readers write ghost chapters for text as a way to understand the transaction that happens between the text and reader. Very interesting. The readers write ghost chapters for text. That means when you read a text, for example, I have already told you that almost all of us were familiar with Shakespeare's sonnets. So when you read a particular sonnet, so we read the sonnet for the first time or the second time or the third time, then we have parallelly, in a parallel way, we try to create another sonnet, the way we understand it. So we try to imagine another meaning of the same text in our own way. So we are imagining another text in that sense. So that's why he's saying that ghost chapter, ghost text you create to understand the text. And this transaction between the ghost text or the ghost chapter and the real text that you can see there and the meaning that actually you are creating. So the transaction between these two, that will give you the meaning. And there the gap will be filled between the implied reader and the actual reader and the artistic and the aesthetic poles. Okay, so I'm reading it again. Readers write ghost chapters for text as a way to understand the transaction that happens between the text and the reader. So the text and the reader, the transaction, if you want to understand it, then you will create the ghost text, the same text in your imagination, in your cognition, you will create another parallel text. As you can see, Eisner's textual reader response criticism is based on his contention that reader concretizes the text, gives its meaning. That means reader will give a meaning to the text. It will impart a meaning on the text, or it will infuse a meaning to the text, while the text necessarily guides these concretization. So text actually, it influences us. We also get influenced by the text, and then we create the meaning. So in a sense, text will lead you to a meaning. Consequently, a literary text operates by indeterminacy. So there is nothing fixed, and it has gaps that the reader attempts to fill. So always we try to fill the gaps. Okay. So these are the different techniques. You can read it yourself. I'll be sharing this with you, where actually you can find that how can we analyze the text. So you can see the rhetoric of fiction from where the way literature engages us through its language or rhetoric. So you can analyze the language, you can analyze the rhetoric. In that way, actually, you can understand the textual, textual meaning of the text. So here, wine booth, that's his image. Implied author, we'll not talk about it anymore. Now let's see what we have. Now, the second one, experiential reader response, the second strategy. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the experiential reader response, as you can see, that experiential, it sounds like experience, right? অভিজ্ঞতার থেকে আসছে এরকম মনে হচ্ছে না?
Yes, sir.
So experiential reader response critics like Stanley Fish are unlike the textual reader response critics in one very important aspect. They emphasize the reader's reading process over the literary work. So we have seen that then in the previous one, that is the textual reader response, where text is very important, right? Because text will guide, text will influence the readers, not the writer, but the text. It's a style that will influence the reader. But here we can see it is not that fact. The one important aspect is that they emphasize, that means the experiential reader response theorists, they emphasize the reader's reading process over the literary work. So they emphasize the reader's reading process. That means the way you read it, that is important, not the literary work, not its artistic value. It's not important here, just the reader's reading process, the way you read it. So Fish calls this kind of reader response as affective stylistics, reminding us of that effect that literature has on us and of the new critical affective fallacy that rejected any emotional responses a reader might have to a literary work. But here you can see, as you can remember, the new criticism, we read it that the affective fallacy, that means the personal emotion of the readers, that must be ignored, right? I hope you can recall it. We read it in the new criticism that the affective fallacy that should be avoided. So the reader's personal experience should not be used to analyze a text. Remember that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But here you can see it's the otherwise, actually, the affective stylistics, that is reminding us of the effect that literature has on us. So it is important that the stylistics features of the writing that will have some effect on the reader, and the reader will create meaning accordingly using that feeling. So to Fish, then, affective stylistics is the experience the reader has while reading, which he defines as a threefold process. He's saying that this affective stylistics, it is actually based on the experience of the reader, the way actually you experience a particular work. And he says that it has threefold process. That means there are three different stages. But before that, let's read this quote by Stanley Fish. He says that people write or speak sentences in order to produce an effect. And the success of a sentence is measured by the degree to which the desired effect has been achieved. A very nice code. Now, so as you can see on the screen, three different threefold you can say stages. You can see one is readers surrender themselves to the text. So first of all, reader will surrender to the text, letting the text wash over them. In fact, at this stage, readers should not be concerned with trying to understand what the work is about. So reader will just read the text. They will not think about that much about the style or other thing. Just go through the text. That's it, plain and simple, and try to feel it. The second thing, readers next concentrate on their reading responses while reading, seeing how each word, each sentence, each paragraph elicits a response. In the second stage, you will concentrate on their reading responses while reading. So reading response while reading, that means when you read the text, what was your response? How did you feel, or what did you feel? And seeing how each word or each sentence or paragraph, that means all the words, how are they connected, and how the sentences are connected, and how they elicit the meaning, elicit the responses from the paragraph, from the text. That means the interrelationship or interconnectedness of the words, sentences, and paragraphs. So that you have to concentrate on. And finally, what you do as a reader, first of all, you just read it, you just surrender yourselves to the text, then you try to understand your feelings, your process, and also you try to understand the connections or interconnectedness among the different sorts of, the interrelationship of the words, sentences, and paragraphs, and how they create a kind of response in you. And finally, readers should describe the reading experience by structuring their reading response, which may be in conflict with a common interpretation of the work. So finally, it's you. You will try to explain the reader, interpret the text in your own way. You will explain you'll interpret the text in your own way. So that's to say that the reading experience by structuring their reading responses. That means the reader's reading responses. It's not anybody else's. It's yours, and which may be in conflict with the common interpretation of your work. So maybe there are some sort of structured way of interpretation, but your interpretation might, it might conflict with the common interpretation of the work. So individualism, it has been emphasized. That means the individual response of a reader, which is more important here. Now, Fisch's thesis is seductive, for when we read, we are constantly reacting to our reading, connecting it to our personal lives, to other literary works we have read, and to our reading experience at that particular reading moment. Sometimes we will love to read, other times we dread it. So this is very interesting because it happens almost with all of us when you read a text. That means we read the text and we try to interrelate the different events or the ideas of that we can find, or the meanings that we find in the text. We try to relate it to our personal lives or the other literary works that we have already read. So we also try to connect it with other, to try to compare or contrast with other write-ups or other texts. So this is what we do according to, his strategy, the way actually Stanley Fish, he suggested in his affective statistics. Okay. Now, the third one is psychological response. Now, when we read, we are continually connecting to the textual lives, almost as if the literary work is speaking to us personally. So psychological response, from this very term, you can understand that is completely based on your psyche. মানুষের মন বা মনন, the মনোজগৎ নিয়ে যেখানে কাজ করে, আমরা যখন টেক্সট পড়ি, যখন এটাকে একদম রিলেট করি আমাদের ব্যক্তিগত জীবন, কাজ, এগুলোর সাথে. So when we read, we are continually connecting the textual lives, and we do it always, almost as if the literary work is speaking to us personally, as if the work is talking to us. For example, when you read a love poem, what happens that sometimes we feel that it's my experience, it's about me. We feel that. So that is the psychological response that you have about a particular text. The psychological reader response helps us better understand this phenomenon. Now, you can see in this, we have some sort of subjective analysis because it's about your own psyche, about your own mind. So certainly it's going to be very subjective. So it is called subjective criticism. This form of reader response criticism is championed by David Blake, who believes that a reader's response becomes the text itself, ripe for analysis. That means reader's response becomes the text itself. The way you responded, that is the text. Otherwise, the text doesn't exist. To Blake, a literary text comprises a real entity, the text, the words on the page, which is a concrete object, and our interpretation of the concrete text. The text is concrete, and our interpretation is concrete, which can be seen as a symbolic object. That means he is taking as a symbol. It's a very much psychoanalytical. I mean, this sort of, reader response. So and it's very symbolic object means we re-symbolize the text through our perceptions and beliefs. That means we have our own perception about the world. We have our own perception about the literary works and different other things, and we have our own beliefs. So we put all these things together, our perceptions and beliefs, to re-symbolize. That means we take a text and we try to symbolize it in our own way. So that's why we call it re-symbolization. So in that way, actually, you try to understand the text. So everything actually it is happening within your mind and within your psyche. That's why it's a highly personal. You can say it's very much subjective, because it's you actually who will create the meaning, and it's me who will create the meaning. And it will vary to person. That's why it's very much subjective. So that is David Blake, I can see. Now identity analysis. So first one is subjective analysis, then we have identity analysis. The Norman Holland's approach to reader response follows in the footsteps of subjective criticism. So it's almost subjective criticism, but actually he interpreted it in a little bit different way. According to Holland, people deal with text the same way they deal with life. That means the way, if you have a problem or if you see things in our personal life, the way we deal with it, he's saying that the people also deal with the text in a similar fashion. Holland would say that we gravitate toward particular literary works because they speak to our inner, our psychological needs. Gravitate toward particular literary works. So if you take a literary work by John Keats, so any poem by John Keats, so you can see that he's saying that we'll gravitate. That means we'll feel attracted to that particular text. We will, we'll analyze the particular text as if actually it is talking to our inner self. So you can see it's a kind of, you identify yourself with the text, or you identify your meaning, your life, with the meaning and life that is infused into the text. In the same way, actually, you can identify yourself. So that's why you call it identity analysis. That means you identify yourself with the text as if the text is you, or you are the text. In other words, each reader has an identity that we can analyze, which will open up the literary text to personal interpretation based on the reader's identity. So I have my own identity, I have my own experience. So I will try to, try to analyze the text on the basis of my own identity, about my own personality. So when actually you find that the text is talking to you, that's why they speak to our inner, our psychological needs. So when it talks to your psychological needs, then you find that it is identified, and therefore it is identity analysis. This is also very subjective. It's based on personal feelings. So that is Norman Holland. Now, social reader response. Now, often referred to as reception theory, social reader response is interested in how a literary work is received over time. So it's not only about the person, the way a reader actually receives a text, rather actually the whole society, collectively, the meaning it has been created, the collectively how actually the society actually it creates the meaning, or how collectively actually we respond to a text. So social reader response is interested in how a literary work is received over time. সময়ের সাথে সাথে কিভাবে একটা টেক্সটকে সবাই নিচ্ছে। ফর এক্সাম্পল, নজরুলস ওয়ার্ক or ট্যাগরস ওয়ার্ক 20 বছর আগে কেমন করে দেখেছে, বা 30 বছর আগে মানুষ কিভাবে নিত, এখন আমরা আবার সেটাকে কিভাবে দেখছি। সময়ের সাথে সাথে কিন্তু অনেক সময় আমাদের পার্সপেক্টিভ চেঞ্জ হয় একটা টেক্সটের ব্যাপারে। তো এই যে রিসিভড ওভার টাইম, that means in different decades or different centuries, the way actually we perceive or the way you receive the text. So that is important here. So in fact, the status of a literary work is dependent on the reader's reception of the work. That means the work is dependent on the reader's reception of the work. That is the primary thing, that how the reader is, he has received the work. So hence, Robert Jones, a key figure in reception theory, argues that the history of the reader is as important as the history of the literary work. In fact, the reader's evolving interpretation is at the heart of the changing literary status. That means history of the reader is important. That means throughout the time, you have gained some experience and you have the history, and that is also as important as the history of the literary work. That is a literary work when it was written and how actually it has been perceived in different other times, and also how it has been received in your own time, and how actually you're receiving that work, as an individual. So these things are interconnected, interrelated. So that's what we're calling it social reader response. Okay. So that is Hans Robert Joss. The last strategy that we call cultural reader response. Culture, you understand, it's from the culture. So cultural reader response acknowledges the readers will bring their personal background to the reading of the text. Personal background, that is, you will bring your own culture, you will bring your own context to understand the text. That means, what is that background? What do you mean by this personal background? Personal background means your gender. For example, if you read a love poem, so a female reader will read it from her female perspective, possibly, and a male reader will read that poem from a male perspective. So gender is very important, that the way actually you understand the text. And also as a writer, as it is important, as a reader, it is also important. So race, your race, for example, the black people, white people, or Asian, or that means your ethnicity, which is also very important here. And sexual orientation, that means whether you're a straight or whether you're gay or lesbian. The way actually you have your perspective about the sex. So that is also important to understand the text. Even political affiliation, that means people who believe in a particular political party or a political dogma or ideologies. You see, on the basis of that, they will understand the text, they will interpret the text from that perspective. That's why all these things are very important. So your personal background really actually it contributes to the creation of meaning of a text. So as a reader, actually, we cannot ignore our personal background. So, and that's why cultural reader response theory, actually, it emphasizes on the personal background to the reading of a text. So here you can see all these 5 strategies in one slide in these in this picture. You see textual, that is reader's knowledge of conventions, the way actually you understand the style or the art of the text, and also your own knowledge is there. Then if we move through clockwise, then we can read. Then psychological, that is reader's cognitive or subconscious processes, that means his psyche, it is very important there. Cultural readers, cultural is reader's cultural role, attitudes, context, these are important. Social is reader's social role and perceptions of the social context, the way you see the society, the social context is very important. And experiential is reader's engagement or experience, the experience that you bring to understand the text. Okay, dear students?
Yes, sir.
Now, if you have any question, you can ask me. So with these further strategies, actually, I'd like to conclude our today's discussion. Do you have any questions, dear students? I hope you have got some idea about the reader response theory, since you have some idea about the phenomenology, because in the previous lecture we discussed about it. So we discussed it. So I believe that you have some understanding about reader response theory. Still, if you have any confusion or if you have any more to know about the response theory, just let me know. So in the next session, we can also talk about it, or we can discuss it from different angles. Any question? Dear students, is that okay?
Yes, sir. মোটামুটি স্যার কনসেপ্টটা বুঝে গিয়েছে স্যার।
Okay, that's great. That's great. So you see that how actually we have gained some sort of independence, or you can say we have become free, and we have been empowered as readers, right? To analyze the text or to interpret the text. So we can have, or we can create meaning in our own way as readers. Don't you think so? That reader response theory actually, it talks about the readers, it empowers the readers. What do you think? Jana, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we feel empowered as readers when you read the reader response theory. So next time I will try to give you more ideas about reader response theory, and we'll try to interpret text on the basis of these strategies. So I will give you some text from different literary genres, and then we'll try to analyze it. So even in the coming exam, you may also find some of the stuff from the reader response theory. So you have to use the reader response theory or all these strategies that I've already mentioned to analyze it or to interpret the text, and you can have your own meaning. So that's the beauty of reader response theory. So thank you very much for your participation, and hope to see you next time, inshallah. So take care of yourself, and bye-bye.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi. Have a good day.